Okay, so let's get started. We've got a good amount of the people that are signed up here already. Thank you for being early. We are going to talk about yellowtail fishing in general, and this is while this is more geared towards private boaters, a lot of it, people that fish on sport boats and stuff as well, can get a lot of information out of this whole thing too, because well, we're going to be talking a lot about presentations as well. So basically what we're going to be covering here is identifying the different types of structure that yellowtail associate with, which is very basic, but it's a good starting point for everything. And then understanding how and why yellowtail associate with these different spots. And for private boaters, this means going out and finding it, but for a guy that fishes on a sport boat, it might mean, hey, this is how I should fish when I go here. We're going to be looking at how to read conditions to locate biting fish and covering the proper tackle for specific presentations, along with finally closing out with presentations specific to seasonal feeding habits and specific structure types. Now, this sounds like a lot of stuff here, but it'll be a lot easier as I go along and not nearly as confusing as it is just me telling you this here. So there's two basic kind of structure types that we encounter yellowtail here in Southern California and also in Mexico, and they're basically standalone high spots that are surrounded by deep water or areas that are associated with islands or the coast, and they fish differently. And as you can see in this picture, here's my buddy Jimmy pulling on a big yellow at Farnsworth Bank, which is very close to Catalina Island, but fishes differently than the rest of the island does. And going to the next slide. The reason is, so this is Farnsworth Bank. Actually, I have a little tool here that I can indicate. Uh-oh. Come on back now. Now I just messed up. Stand by here. Okay, I think I'm good now. Yeah, I got a line. Perfect. Sorry. Learned a new program here. So anyway, Farnsworth Bank is a series of three shallower pinnacles and one very deep one. And a lot of banks, wherever you are, if you're at the rock pile below the Coronados or Farnsworth Bank, right? I'm looking at a couple other ones. They all fish as basically submerged islands. And when you approach them, you really have to look at them as if they were an island, because they're basically an area of shallow water. You can see these two, I pointed to here, the two main pinnacles on the bank. These come up pretty shallow, and it's a good place to lose yellow. So we have two deeper pinnacles. The outside one's fairly deep, and you rarely would target yellows on that. But what these pinnacles really are is they're high spots that come out of deep water. So there's 250-foot water out here. It's hard to see in this image, but it goes from 250 feet to about 40 feet. And what that does is this is basically open ocean, as you can see in this previous. No, it's not letting me do it now. I guess it won't let me do it. In the previous pic, you're a good ways away from the island. So basically, there's uninterrupted current flow coming usually west to east along the backside of Cali. It could go the other way too, but what happens is these high spots, they create current breaks, which tend to aggregate plankton and things like that, which in turn will aggregate the bait fish to feed on them. And yellowtail, being predators that eat bait fish, will go there to eat those bait fish. So a lot of people, and me for one, when I first started going, it's like, oh, you have to go to Farnsworth Bank, and that's where the big yellowtail live, and you go there and they're going to bite. I learned pretty early on that's not the way it goes. But what it is this bank creates a disturbance in the normal flow of water to aggregate bait fish, and it also gives the game fish structure to associate with to feed on those bait fish. And this sounds really high level when you're talking about the bigger picture of things, but anywhere you go to catch yellowtail, even on a kelp patty, they're associating with a known piece of structure, which is the patty, that aggregates bait fish. With you've seen a million patties that have bait on them and nothing else, and they use it as an opportunity to feed. So the yellowtail at Farnsworth Bay may or may not live there year round, but they know that they can go there to feed because there's a disruption in the flow of water that's coming down the coast uninterrupted otherwise in open water. So any of these isolated banks, for lack of a better term, they're mostly just pinnacles. You need water movement going across them to aggregate bait fish, to aggregate the yellowtail they're going to feed on. So, you know, this is kind of a little bit out in left field here, but imagine this bank where all these bait fish and all these yellowtail live, they all just live there happily together until feeding time comes. The feeding time for the bait fish will be when the current brings plankton or whatever else they're feeding on into their range where they'll line up to feed on it. The yellowtail know that the bait fish, which had been scattered about, are now aggregated in one spot and are easier to feed upon. So they will use that opportunity to target these fish. So any of these banks that you're fishing on, the biggest thing you're looking for anywhere is current. And the reason that bait fish aggregate on these banks is you can see these, let me erase these other lines here and go back to my pen. This dramatic contour change, you can see it right here, the close lines indicate that the depth comes up very quickly. You can certainly see it here. It goes from deep to shallow in a very short interval. And what that'll do is that creates the water to upwell, which brings up the nutrients which the bait fish will feed on. And that's the reason, more than anything else, why there'd be fish, yellowtail especially, there to feed on bait fish on these banks. So understanding that is important because regardless of what bank you're feeding on, you're going to need water movement and bait aggregation to find biting fish. I mean, there can be yellowtail there swimming idly along the bait fish, but they're going to be spread out. You know, if there's 100 yellowtail on Farnsworth Bank today, they're going to be spread out over a quarter mile or more, and you're not going to catch one probably. You might get lucky and drift and catch one on a jig or a bait, but it's going to be pretty tough. So what you're looking for is any conditions that are going to drive these fish to bite. And be it at Farnsworth or any of the other banks I'm going to show you, the biggest indicator is current. And when you find current, you're going to look for spots bait. When I fish Farnsworth a few times a year, it's not one of my go-to spots, but I usually do pretty well there when it's biting. And the reason it's biting is because there's current, there's bait fish there, and a lot of times you'll never even mark a yellowtail when you're fishing these spots. You're just going to pull up and look for bait. And if you guys read any of my stuff or follow what I talk about online a lot, you know, you're looking for unhappy bait. That's just my whole. If I can teach you one thing about any kind of fishing, look for unhappy bait. You know, if there's an even fuzz of bait, you don't want that. There's going to be, it could be on the bottom, it could be mid-column, it could be on the surface. If the bait looks relaxed, if you can look in the water and see bait swimming happily, there's probably not going to be any biting fish there, whether it's calico bass or yellowtail or tuna or any of those things. What you're going to look for is bait that's tightly balled. So when I go to Farnsworth Bank, I don't try and meter yellowtail, and I don't drive right up to the high spot. I drive around and I look for balls of tightly packed bait or a fuzz of bait that has broken sections out of it, which looks like there's fish assaulting the bait. And in a place like Farnsworth Bank, it's most likely going to be yellowtail. It might be bonita, but it's certainly not going to be rockfish or sculpin chasing that bait around. So if you see tight balls of bait, there's some kind of feeding activity going on. Now if I can figure out how to go through without, sorry. Again, this is my new, come on, leave it. Oh, I have to go back to this. Uh-oh. No, sorry. I'm trying to learn this new program here, guys, so you have to bear with me. There we go. Okay, so another spot that's just like, and again, if you have any questions at any point here, feel free to type in your question, and I can answer it on the spot, makes things a little bit easier. I really hope that I'm not missing anyone's questions, but I don't think so. Anyway, the 9 fathom spot at San Clemente Island is a lot like Farnsworth Bank, Catalina. You can see it here at the, I'm the worst at this right now. Yeah. this is not working out as fine. So I had this whole thing where I could draw things. It's just not working out. So I'm gonna use my cursor here, and I apologize. Like I said, new program. So if you can see my mouse, my arrow. This is the 9 fathom spot off the west end of San Clemente Island. While it's close to the island, it's a lot like Farnsworth Bay. So basically, you have a high spot that comes up to I think about 50 feet. Well, 9 fathoms would be 6 times 9, which would be 54 feet actually, depending on the tide. It comes out of very deep water. There's water 200 feet deep or more around it. And basically all this is it's a current break. All these banks just break the current, aggregate plankton, things like that these fish feed on. And the fish are going to be oriented to feed on the bait fish that are feeding on that plankton. So I'm going to try one more time here to use my pen. Come on. Why is this so difficult? I apologize, everybody. If there's current that's aggregating plankton or things like that on these banks, you're going to see the normal signs. There's going to be balls of bait. At the 9 particularly, there's usually a lot of bird on that because that's one of the areas, the bird that works the west of Clemente will go out there and look for that bait fish out there. And they're a great indicator. Just because you see birds doesn't always mean that there's going to be fish associated with them. But if there's no birds, there's probably no bait, and that means there's probably no biting fish. There might be yellowtail there, but you're probably not going to get any interest of them. And again, I have to qualify this. I'm not a guy who goes and sits there and anchors up and fishes a dropper loop with a squid or a mackerel for 10 hours hoping for a bite. I'm actually looking for actively biting fish, and if I don't find them, I'm going to go and do something else. But anyway, so the way it works is any of these banks, be it the Farnsworth, be it the 9, be it Desperation Reef, which I'm going to show you in a second, current direction plays a huge role. So if the current is coming, it usually runs down our coast. But due to the layout of our coast, which actually faces south, the current runs from, I guess, northwest to southeast. I guess, yeah, it kind of runs at this angle down our coast usually. That's the prevailing current direction. So if I'm approaching a bank like this, I will look on the upcurrent edge of the bank to look for the bait fish and stuff. The feeding activity might not be going on there, but if the current is running in this picture here from 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock, any bait fish that are going to be aggregating on that bank are going to be on that edge there because that's the direction it's bringing their food. So by association, if they're feeding yellowtail, they're most likely to be on that edge. There are a bunch of smaller secondary pinnacles and stuff on this bank that could be aggregating bait, or there could be a kelp bed or something that's the bait is hiding where the fish are feeding in. But usually these fish on these deeper spots are relating to current and the plankton and stuff that the bait fish are feeding on when they're actively feeding, because they're looking for something to eat, and that thing is these bait fish, which are aggregated by the current. Desperation Reef on the other end of San Clemente Island is a very similar situation, but it's deeper. This is, 200 to 180, 190 feet, goes like 300. I'm circling it here with my mouse. I really wish I could get my pen to work, but it doesn't seem to want to do that for some reason. Not sure what's going on with that. Hopefully by next time I'll have this worked out better, and I apologize. The new program worked fine when I was testing it, but it's not working so great now. This reef is basically, it's one of the first places that the yellowtail tend to show up in the spring, and it's a deep water spot. That's normally a rockfish spot, but you'll get yellows there, and they're usually yo-yo fish that come out of there, but they're doing the exact same thing as the fish at Farnsworth are, or the fish at the 9, or the fish at the rock pile in San Diego, or the finger banks are doing. These fish are coming up and associating with structure that is in proximity to a place where water upwells and brings nutrients to bait fish. And you can see here, I don't know if you can see my mouse as well as line. We go from over 700 feet here very quickly to 300, and then it goes up onto this reef. So what's happening is as this water is And a lot of times the current can come the other way. But as the current comes, it'll push and accelerate that flow and bring up all that, the plankton and things like that these bait fish feed on, which is the same reason the other rock fishing could be good here as well, as opposed to a spot that's more centralized. So a lot of these places, all of them actually, are shallow spots in relation to deep water. They have ready access to deep water. The current brings the plankton up. The bait fish aggregate there to feed on it, and the yellows are there. That big yellowtail bite we had on the 150 a few years ago, where they were there for like a year, those fish were there because it was no different than this shelf right here, except it was on the coast. And what it did was it upwelled plankton. The bait fish were there to eat it. The yellowtail were there to feed on it. So, I mean, it's as simple as it gets for that kind of thing. So, this is Jimmy with a big yellow we got at Farnsworth last year. The conditions we look for, we're looking for current. We're looking for clean water, and we're looking for water temperatures that are not any lower than the water temperatures in other similar spots. One of the problems with these offshore high spots is they create an upwelling, and at upwelling, the water down deeper is colder than the water on the surface. So you can pull up on any of these spots, and the water could be 8 or 10 degrees colder than it is. Maybe not that much. Let's say it's 5 to 8 degrees colder than it is on other spots if there's a huge upwelling going on. Point Fermin and Long Beach, I've seen 10-degree temperature swings in a half mile. But even a couple of degrees can make a difference. But if you're within 2 or 3 degrees of what the water temperature is everywhere else, you're probably good to go, and I wouldn't worry about it. Because if the water is significantly colder, you're going to have fish that are inactive due to their metabolism slowing down. And while they're there, they may not be readily biting. So if you have consistent water temperatures with the rest of the island, you have clean water, you have bait fish, and you have current, there's no reason there shouldn't be biting fish here. This particular day, when we fished Farnsworth Bank, it was in October last year, I think, early October. There had been some fish caught there. We ran out, pulled up, a couple boats fished in the bank. There was no yellowtail being metered. There was no real birds working or anything. So we drove around. We found very consistent bait marks. And then we found an area where the bait marks were broken. And basically the bait marks were like a hedge along the bottom. It's just bait down near the bottom, rockfish below it. It's just very consistent fuzz of bait. And then we found some broken areas. And that broken area was semi-adjacent to one of the pinnacles. So we stopped there, and our friend Rob, who I don't have a picture of right now, dropped a yo-yo jig, and on the first or second drop caught a yellowtail on it. As the morning progressed, we were coming up on a slack tide, and what happens a lot on the slack tide, high or low, is bait comes to the surface. Marlin guys believe in that. I know it works big time offshore. I think yellows and stuff deal with it the same way. Pardon me. As the morning slack high tide approached, the bait marks started to come to the surface and spread out. At that point, we started band casting with surface iron, and we're sinking down, halfway to the bottom, like a 45-degree angle, bomb a cast out, sink it out, retrieve it back. And Jimmy caught this yellowtail. I caught another one. I hooked 2 more that ended up smoked me into the pinnacle. I think Rob, our buddy, might have hooked another one. And once the high tide came through, the current quit and everything changed and it was over. But that's kind of how this thing goes. So basically what happens is you have current, you have a feeding situation. The feeding can be on the bottom. As the tide slacks off, the bait comes up, the fish can come up with it and bite or not. And then once the current changes, it's kind of a reset, or the tide changes, it's kind of a reset. It might continue to bite, but usually that's a definitive moment. So another example is if you're there and say you're coming up on a high or low tide and nothing's happening, it might be worth waiting through that tide to see if the change has any effect on the bite. This is all kind of in the same box here, but this is island or coastal spots. and how to relate to them. And this is a bank off the edge of Santa Barbara Island. I don't know the name of the spot, but this photo is deceiving. We're not nearly as far as you would think away from the island. We're actually about 60 feet of water, and I'm going to show you a little thing here in a minute. Here are these red dots that I made while trying to draw lines earlier. This is Benny Florentino and his son Matt. We were over there actually shooting photos for a Calico Bass article. We saw some sign off the island of yellows. We saw birds, terns, stuff working. It's a real well-known area, and we ran out there and got, I don't know, half a dozen or so yellows. But I'm going to get back to that. Actually, I'm going to change my sequence here in a minute. So the area that we were fishing at Santa Barbara Island is this area out here, and this is, I'm sure it has some kind of name, but there's these ridges and reefs, and the Navionics chart shows it real well. All these lines are contour lines that change the depth. So basically, where my pointer here is 51 feet, and it goes up to 60 feet, it goes out to 90 feet out here. So the closer the lines, the quicker the drop off. And this being on the prevailing current direction is the same in all these photos. They're north oriented, so most of the current that we have along our coast comes this direction. This spot here can get current that, I mean, during lobster season, they connect two buoys together, and those things can be pulled down 15, 20 feet by the current. Tremendous amount of upwelling on this edge, and through this shallow zone here, this is all shallows. It goes down to 50 or 60 feet, but I mean, just spots in here that break on a big swell. That's basically where we're fishing. We were right around the edge of this here, and what was happening that day is the current was coming up here, pushing that plankton and stuff up. The bait fish were on the leading edge of this feeding, and the yellowtail were chasing those things down current along the island. And by watching the birds, we could see where they were going. So there's a lot of structure here, and there's a lot of isolated kelp stringers and other stuff like that. But I'm not paying attention to any of that while I'm fishing those fish. I am 100% watching for bait schools on the meter and watching what the birds do. The birds are always going to indicate to you what's going on. And I'm going to bring this up now. It's kind of out of place, but tern birds are the only birds really worth watching. The gray seagulls are probably the second best, and the cormorants, but they're a pretty distant second. The way birds work is, especially terns, is they watch what's going on under the water, and they make calculations as to at what point they can, whatever is being pushed around is going to come to the surface and they can pick it off. So when terns are watching fish that are feeding deep, the tern will be higher, because the higher they are, the more angles that they can take to meet up with that fish. As the fish bring the bait fish up, the terns get lower to try and be quicker. And then when a tern is coming to the surface to pick, you can almost be guaranteed there's a fish chasing a bait fish to the exact spot that tern knows to intercept with that. So high birds mean fish are deep, or they're searching. They're just looking for any sign of feeding. And especially with terns, they will be very stationary with their wings. They may flap a little bit, but they are cruising and they're scanning with their eyes. Once they see something, they will start to lower. If they see something happening quickly, they will lock in and they will drop down. And the bird dropping down is an indication that something's coming up. And usually that's a yellowtail in this situation chasing a bait fish to the surface. So seeing one tern that's flying high zoom in and lock in on something is enough to tell you there's feeding activity going on there. And that's the situation we have here. So while there's all these spots, we're not even concerned with any of them. We know there's bait fish here. We know there's current going this direction. The bait fish are pulling down this leading edge of this thing. And anything from here back could be feeding ground for these fish. They're not going to be ahead of it, and they're likely not going to be on the other edge of it. But bait fish aren't necessarily, a bait fish that's got to turn to run can run down current as well. And if you got 2 or 3 knots of current, a bait fish swimming fast can cover this distance in a minute. So there's no reason a yellowtail wouldn't be throughout this whole zone. So what you want to watch for is bait fish movements, and again, it's going to be the unhappy bait. It's going to be the small, tight balls of bait, scared, moving, and you're going to look for birds that are coming down and actually engaging with something. You know, the high-flying birds, the birds that land and sit, they may pick something off and sit down and eat. That's not signs of feeding. They might be eating a red crab. They might be eating a very stupid bait fish. I don't know. But birds that land aren't usually on fish. So if you see a bird dip, and a lot of times, especially if they flare right at the surface, they'll make a last-minute adjustment to get a bait fish. That means that bait fish is being chased. The bait fish that are not being chased, they swim in a straight line. If a bird sees it, they can come down very easily and pick that bait fish off. If a bait fish is swimming erratically, the bird's coming down, but it has to flare up to adjust to, because I mean, its bill's like this, you know, tiny, and it has to grab the thing. I mean, if you think about the math involved, that's just mind blowing, but it's a very good indicator. So you can tell by the aptitude of the birds just what they're doing and if they're actually on fish. On that day, that was exactly the case. You know, we were watching birds actually driving around slowly to where those birds were making pinpointed casts and hanging 1 to 3 fish a stop. One of the other situations you run into at islands, and I'm going to back up again here, San Clemente Island is a great example, as is the south side of Santa Barbara Island, where you have a fathom curve, for lack of a better term, that runs the length of the island. At San Clemente Island, there's a about to sneeze, I apologize. Or maybe not. Always when you're being filmed, right? There's a 15 fathom curve, which is 90 feet, 6 feet in a fathom, that runs along the entire length of the front side of the island. You can see these dark lines where it's very dark. This is where it drops off very quick. And then the lines spread out, which means the drop off is less gradual. That is at about 90 feet of water, depending where you're at the island, 90 to 100 feet. And that is the threshold of where activity happens. Bait fish travel at the edge of that ridge. Once you get up shallow, let's say you're a sardine swimming up the front side of San Clemente Island. In 90 feet of water, you're pretty safe. If you get any shallower than that, you have to dodge bass. You have to swim around kelp stringers and other things like that. They're looking to feed, and they're taking advantage of this longer, slower drop off that comes here that causes a little eddy on that drop off edge. And these bait fish swim along here feeding on that 90-foot depth range. Yellowtail by association do the same thing. And all the yellowtail you're going to catch on the front side of Clemente are going to be within casting distance of that 90-foot ridge. I was there about a month ago and basically just drove along the 90-foot ridge until I found an area that had some bait, some birds. And we stopped and caught 4 or 5 fish. We lost a few more big ones. But that's basically the way it works. I don't care if it's San Clemente Island or Santa Barbara Island, the south edge of it here, there's a 90-foot ridge that runs along there as well. It just happens to be right at 90 feet, 15 fathoms. Not that depth's important. That's a hard line that runs along that island. And you know, if you see sport boats lined up one after the other at Santa Barbara Island, they're lined up right on that drop-off. And what happens is that bait gets pushed up. There's a little current eddy right there. The bait gathers, and those fish get right on it as well. So just like the high spots, the island topography affects where those fish are going to be. So the last one I want to talk about is a place like the Coronado Islands. I couldn't get the whole thing onto my picture here, but I want to look at some areas at the Coronado Islands and talk about why they bite. So, you know, Pukey Point, well-known spot here at the north end of North Island. If you look here at how black those lines are, that's a tremendous amount of drop-off, which creates at the angle that all the current comes for the most part down our coast. That pushes up a ton of plankton and other junk that those bait fish eat. They aggregate there, so of course the yellowtail are going to be there to eat as well. The lee of the island has real steep stuff as well, and the weather side does. It's a little more slopey, but what happens is that current runs down that island on both sides, and fish might be aggregating there, but the current's going to be going pretty fast through there because it's sped up as it's coming up this thing. It goes down the side, and then, hey, we have this nice flat area where the current kind of relaxes, and all that plankton that the bait fish want to eat can aggregate, and that's the middle grounds where you catch a lot of yellowtail, and they're there because that's an area where the bait fish will go to feed. It sounds really simple, but I mean, it's the absolute truth. And, I was fishing down here with Dwayne Miller and Greg Trompus a couple years ago. And we just slayed them on this side here of the lee side of the. I don't even know what they're called. I think one is like Genoa or something. I don't know much about the Coronado, so we're going to catch fish, I guess. But there's a lot of little pinnacles and things here that interrupt the current and aggregate bait fish, and we just drove along looking for bait schools on these high spots, and when we would find one, we would, I think about 50% of the time, get a bite from a yellowtail. The other side of the island here doesn't have nearly the amount of pinnacles and stuff, so it's a pretty steady flow of water through here, which means that there's not much of an opportunity for plankton to get upwelled and bait fish to aggregate. So basically, the Coronados are basically an exposed version of a place like the Farnsworth Bank or something. The current comes, there's spots that break the current. As the current breaks, it upwells, it brings up nutrients that aggregate bait fish, and the yellowtail are drawn to that. And the reason I'm telling you going on and on about upwelling and aggregation of bait fish is that's what yellowtail do, they eat. So they're most likely going to be in a spot where it's the easiest pickings, and easy pickings to them is an abundance of bait fish, and bait fish are going to the place where they have the easiest access to their food, which will be plankton or other microscopic things that they eat, and all that comes through upwelling. So current has a huge effect on this. And if you ever gone to the Coronado, if you can't find fish anywhere, and you finally find a spot of fish somewhere, it's because the current is bringing bait fish, and that's activating the yellowtail to bite. And if that sounds like an oversimplification, I'm sorry, but that's basically yellowtail, any fish are basically just machines that take in calories and try and burn less calories than they take in. So they're going to go to places where they have the highest chance of eating, which at the Coronados, it's obvious. Yeah, hey, Piggy Point, there's probably be a lot of bait fish there. Here, it seems like there'd be a lot of current on the sides, but there's not really anything to aggregate that plankton for those bait fish to feed. But the swirls that are coming off this island, off the south end of North Island, through the middle grounds, can trap plankton, which can aggregate bait fish and bring yellowtail around. It's simple, but I found it to be true basically 100% of the time. I need to make sure I'm not missing anything. So the conditions we're looking for in island situations. This photo is a great photo here, by the way. If I do say so myself. I took this photo of Catalina. Matt and I were fishing the front side for bass. You can see I had some hard baits tied on and stuff like that. There was a line of red crabs out on the probably 90-foot drop off there at the island. Might have been 120 foot. I'm not sure what the one at Catalina is. But there was a line of seagulls and stuff for miles. And as we were fishing bass and tight to the beach, I was watching spots of seagulls get up and really start hopscotching. And when they're on red crabs, a lot of times they'll flare up. They'll eat a couple of red crabs to land. They'll flare up. They'll eat a couple of red crabs to land. In this case, they were acting somewhat irregular, and they were flaring up, and they weren't settling right back down. So anytime we're at an island, we got a couple of jig sticks tied on. So I watched, and I pulled the trolling motor and started to idle out. Just as I idled out, some birds got real active. So I gunned it to them, pulled the boat out of gear. We got a couple of casts off, and as the jigs are in the air, we had a school of maybe 100, 200 fish come up in between us and the jig. I mean, 30 feet off the boat. Instant double on the hookup. I took a selfie of myself to put on Facebook and tease my friends who were working that day. But we landed those 2 yellows, and then that was it. That was our one shot of the day. But what happened is there was yellows, for whatever reason, they decided to feed on those red crab at that moment. The birds told me exactly what was going to happen. I was able to I had time to pack up my basket, run out there, a couple hundred yards, and have my jig in the water by the time those fish came together. But without paying attention to that or understanding that there's a depth range that those fish are running along, if you go out to an island, there's red crab, you're going to see a line of birds in a very straight line at a certain depth. And those birds are there eating crab, the crab are there feeding on the upwelling of plankton. So much like anchovies or sardines, those red crabs, what they do is they kick their way up and then they float down, and they have cilia or whatever on their arms that collect plankton, and they turn that into protein that larger fish can eat. They're the primary link between inorganic matter and something a tuna or a yellowtail can eat. So basically, if there's red crabs there, they're feeding on the same stuff that bait fish would feed on, and by association, game fish will be there to feed on those. But with the abundance of red crab, usually the fish can just swim around their mouths open 40 feet down to eat all the red crabs they want. But once in a while, something will happen. Maybe some mackerel will get on them, or something will happen that it just changes the fish and makes them feel competitive. They'll chase those red crabs to the surface, and you can get a jig on them if you have a chance. But again, at the islands, you want current. There has to be a current direction. That day at Clemente, when we got those fish in that 90-foot stuff, we were there in the morning. There was no sign of anything. It was just slack. We saw a few yellows come up, busting on flying fish, scattered. There's no way to target them effectively. We gave it a break for a while. We came back. The current had started to run downhill, which orients everything. So when there's no current, everything swims in every direction. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's no up, there's no down. It's just, imagine floating around in outer space. And then when current starts running, it gives everything gravity. Suddenly everything's locked in. It has to point into the current or it's going to be blowing backwards. So now things that are swimming this way are now swimming in a line this way. And that allows fish to key in on them and ambush them. And they're actually using the current as an ambush point, like they would have. So basically, the school of bait fish is always going to want to swim into the current or swim slowly into the current just to hold their position. So that forces an orientation like a bottom or a surface or a rock wall would. These fish are now all lined up in the same way, and the game fish can take advantage of it. So current's huge. You need food that these fish are feeding on, which could be sardines, anchovies, red crab, whatever. And you need something to indicate that it's there. It might be bait schools. It might be some birds sitting on red crab that are acting funny. These are the things you're looking for. And, if you're inexperienced with it and you're not sure what you're looking at, it doesn't take that much. Go out and look around. If you start to see something, you're like, yeah, that looks different. Go make a couple casts, because usually something that looks different is to do what's going to make a big difference for you. So regarding tackle, I keep things very easy on my boat, and I almost never bring the rod in the bottom of this photo. The top rod is a Penn Fathom 25N full of 65-pound braid or 80-pound braid, depending on the rod, and a Tatty 45 and mint and white tied on her. I also fish the Tatty Starman 112 in mint and white. That's on a rain shadow 9-foot jig stick. The next rod down is a Penn Fathom 40N 2-speed lever drag on another range shot. It's a heavy. It's an RCJB 84XH jig stick, which is a 7-foot rod, very stout, full of 80-pound braid with 80-pound fluorocarbon leader to a Tatty mint and white 4.0 heavy. That's my yo-yo rod. And the bottom one is a bait rod that I took a picture of, but I probably haven't fished in 10 years because I was using that as an example for an article. But yeah, you really only need a couple of jig sticks, and you're going to be pretty well set as far as everything you need to target yellows. I mean, I haven't caught a yellow on bait. I really can't remember the last time I did. So that just shows you. But, if you want to fish bait, go ahead. But most of my techniques are based around jig fishing. So the presentations, this is a picture from the 9 at Clemente with Matt in the bow of Decker's boat. We were chasing spots of yellowtail, and outside of the response to bluefin. This was back in November, late October, early November, when there was still a mix of bluefin on the west end. But there was bird schools. You can see there's a typical bird school here. These birds are, these were mostly seagulls that day, but you can see there's some gray ones in the mix. I like the gray seagulls if there's no terns around. Some of the Clemente just don't have terns. But they were on yellows, and I don't even remember if we caught one that day. But basically, what we're doing is we're running up on these things, casting jigs in the direction they're going. It's pretty simple as far as that goes, but I'm going to try and I'm going to switch to my camera here. I don't know if you guys can see my camera. I'm sure you can. Basically, the presentation for yellows is everybody thinks, oh yeah, just cast it out, burn the jig back as fast as you can. I have found that to be very much not the truth. As far as I'm trying to spot my webcam here, so bear with me a second here. I think it should be coming back on right now. There I am. I just want to make sure I can see myself. When it comes to fishing yellowtail, it does again, darn it. Come on. I'm the worst. Sorry about this, guys. Retrieve has a really big part of what's going on into how you can actually get bites or not get bites. And, you know, a very good example is, and I hate to throw Jimmy under the bus, the other day at Clemente, I tend to experiment a lot with retrieves until I get a bite. I keep very close tabs on how my retrieve works. And we were fishing that zone. After about 10 minutes, I had probably a 25-pound fish come up a dog on a jig. I missed it, but it was on a very specific retrieve. And so what I did was I did that retrieve again, and about 5 or 6 minutes later, I hooked a real big one, and then it ended up coming off. And I caught like a 10-pounder. Then a little while later, I caught it was probably close to 40, maybe over 40. And then 2 or 3 casts later, I caught another one that was over 30. And I stopped fishing for a while. And Jimmy was casting. He finally caught a smaller one. I was tired. I was wiped out. I'm not used to pulling on big yellows all day. But I joke, and he's gonna kill me for sharing this story. And I apologize, Jimmy, if you watch this. He was having a tough time getting bit, and I knew exactly the wine they were biting. So I said, he's like, oh, go ahead and catch one more. We'll take it home for dinner. I said, well, I'll hook one, but I don't want to reel it in because I'm worn out. Oh, that's fine. I'll reel it in if you don't want to. So I took a cast, and the first cast, I hung another one. I'm like, okay, come on. And he grudgingly takes the rod. I guess it's 9-foot rod, just a brutal rod for these things. It's way too stiff. And he said, oh, they're not biting this jig I'm fishing. Wait, I was fishing a mint Tatty Starman 112, and he was fishing a Salad 7X in a mint color. And I took his rod in the first cast. I took 2 or 3 whites and hung another one and said, hey, you better hurry up and reel that one in because you got to reel this one in next. And both fish ended up coming off. They were smaller fish. I think a seal got one. But the point of that story is it's the wine a lot of times can really make all the difference in the world. And I brought this. This is my sabiki rod that I got a little section up here, and I've got a bit of reel. And I'm hoping that you guys can see what I'm doing here if I bring it up the side. A lot of times when you're fishing surface on everything's gonna wind like this or wind at a certain speed. I'll tell you, fish follow jigs that go at a steady speed. They do not necessarily bite them, but they will swim behind them. So what you want to do is you want to change your retrieve. So let's say I fire this thing out, and I'm fishing on the surface. I start with a fast wind. I'll pause and then speed it up, and then pause and then slow it down a couple turns and speed it up, and then slow it down and do like a very uneven retrieve like that. And a lot of times that uneven retrieve will get those fish that are following a jig to think, oh crap, something's coming after this jig, after this bait fish they think they're following, and they'll try and get it before the other ones do. And every time when it's like that, every bite comes like this, and then you pause, and that's pretty much when you get that bite. Same thing goes true for the yo-yo fishing. You're fishing, let's say you're fishing Desperation Reef, you're dropping that Tatty 4.0 heavy. This is a scrambled egg chrome. I got a lot of fish on this last year, straight jig. And everybody's like, okay, yo-yo jig. Why my brain's at? The fish or the jig's just spinning at that fast. So if I'm fishing yo-yo, 4 or 5 fast turns, a couple slow ones, few fast ones, a couple slow ones. Fast ones, pause, fast, slow. And that erratic movement really gets the jig kicking out to the side and draws attention to it. A jig that's just burning up through the column, if there's a fish right next to it, they may or may not bite it. But that more erratic retrieve, that will get those fish to bite when they won't necessarily bite a steady retrieve. And I can't tell you how many times I've fished yellows and had a situation where the fish want to retrieve like that, and if you do it, you can outfish your buddy 5-1 sometimes. Another thing to consider when fishing these jigs, this is a Mint White Caddy 45. This is a Mint White Caddy 9, and this is I don't have Mint Whites on a rod somewhere, the Caddy 40. The Caddy 40 and the Caddy 45 are fairly similar to these size jigs, a little bit smaller, but the Caddy 40 does not swim well. The Caddy 45 swims very well. The Caddy 9 does not swim well either. They're great yo-yo jigs because they're spinning and shooting up in a tight spiral, but when it comes to imparting action to them, it's difficult to get good action on these jigs. So, if you're fishing in 200 feet of water, which would be very deep for yellows for the most part, you could probably sink a Caddy 45 to the bottom in 30 or 40 seconds. A Caddy 40. A Caddy 45 might take you a minute or two, but when you're retrieving that jig, you're going to have much better action than you would with the other jigs. And this is something I've taken from days of fishing barracuda, is a lot of times those fish are not on the surface, so you cast it out. Let's say you're at the horseshoe caliper or whatever, you cast it out, sink your jig down, and you do a slow to medium retrieve at a 45-degree angle. Yellows love that too. I've done great. I fished at the rock pile when the guys weren't getting bit on the yo-yo jig, and I caught a lot of fish doing that. I've done it at all the islands. I've done it on the coast when the fish were not up. So basically, you cast it out as far as you can, like you're winding the surface iron, and you want to do it in a direction that the boat's not going to drift down on top of it. So if you're drifting, cast the other direction, so it's actually going to bring your line out further, because you don't want the jig stripping down. Once it sinks down 50 feet, 100 feet, whatever the depth you want to drop it down to, do a nice steady retrieve like you're fishing a barracuda. Speed it up a little bit, unusual. Just kind of get a rhythm in your head and just kind of get a little pattern. And that pattern will have the jig swimming very erratically. And that surface iron fished like a yo-yo jig at a 45-degree angle will get bites when the guys burn their arms off going straight up are not going to get bites. And that's one of the other things too. You know, if you're not seeing fish breaking on the surface, if they're not foaming yellows, there's no reason to burn your jig on the surface because you're getting way less time in front of the fish. If you sink that, okay, imagine it's that whole, I'm sure there's some geometry here. I'm not going to do the actual math. But if you cast a jig 100 feet and you wind it back on the surface, you're covering 100 feet of water. If you cast a jig 100 feet, you let it sink 50 feet, you're now probably covering 130, 140 feet of the column, and you're also covering different depths. And that allows you to get those fish and that jig in front of, oh no, I was supposed to record. Oh, I am recording, good. I was supposed to record, I thought I forgot. That gives you an opportunity to get the jig in front of fish that you would not get it in front of otherwise. And fish are not always on the surface, and they're not always straight under the boat. But by covering a lot of the column, and if you cast the jig out, you know, hey, I got bit right when I started turning the handle, maybe you should start letting it sink a little further. Or you say, hey, you know, I cast it out, I sank it down 100 feet, and I got bit 30 feet from the boat. I wouldn't bother sinking that far, sink it 50 feet. But these small changes that you make to it are going to really affect, that's the end of my thing there, your chance of getting bit. Now, I've got about 10 minutes left, and they're going to kick me off here. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. You can just type your question in, and happy to go from there. So I'm standing by here if I have a lot of tests from earlier that I missed, and I might have missed a couple questions. Yeah, I had a question about the. Okay. I had a question about hooks. I don't fish a lot of hooks. I fish circle hooks, so I like the owner. The owner, not the real light circle hook, but whatever their medium ones are great. I appreciate the. I had a question about slow trolling. Don't do it. I don't know. Yeah, you know, it's an effective way to find fish. If you're anywhere where there's a lot of seals, I wouldn't do it. I wrote an article specifically about slow trolling. It was in Pacifico Sport Fishing Magazine. If you follow me on Facebook, I have links to my online version of that. If you look at their archives, you can look up stuff. But basically, I would not slow troll unless I saw signs of fish like bait, birds, things like that. But if that's the case, I'd rather just fish a jig. Um, I have questions about the screenshots. I wish I did. I don't. Bait schools. You know, you're looking for uneven bait schools. Tight bait schools that are very dense and small or erratically spaced are ones that are being. This is for James Connell, that are being predated upon are not going to be loose schools. So basically, if you see an expansive school that's very fuzzy, or one that's very consistent like a hedge, those are bait schools that don't have any fish engaging with them. But if you have ones that are tight balls or a hedge with broken spots in it, that's what you're really looking for. Um, you know, I have a question about Point Loma kelp. Andy Wilson, thank you for your question. I have fished yellows there, and I've got them. Basically, you know, it's the same thing. There's a canyon right there. There's upwelling out of the canyon. Bait fish get on it. And some of there's so much bait it just blows your mind. But you're going to look for birds. You're going to look for unhappy bait, basically. But in an area like Point Loma or La Jolla, there's going to be birds going to be your biggest indicator there. So you're going to look for birds that are acting differently than birds that are not on fish. And it sounds silly saying it that way, but you get on the water and you watch birds all day, and suddenly you see some that are acting slightly differently. You're going to know exactly what's going on. I have a question about jig color versus watercolor. Regardless of the watercolor, I fish mint and white. You know, or mint or white and mint, but that's basically it. And once in a blue moon, if there's a lot of squid around, I'll fish a scrambled egg and chrome that I really like, but I like the mint and white better. I just like the way this looks, but I don't think the fish care. You know, another question about the jigs. Yeah, mint and white. You know, I have a question about what's the optimal depth. Optimal depth could be, you know, I was at Cedros Island and I hooked a 50-pound fish in like 6 feet of water. A couple of years ago at the when those fish were biting at 150, I found a big school that was in like 9,000 feet of water. I don't think there's an optimal depth. What you're looking for is depth changes and sharp changes in your depth. And that's why it's good to have a good chart like a Navionics chart that shows you the contour lines, because those depth changes, those abrupt depth changes, are what's going to aggregate bait, and that's where those yellows are going to be. So there's no right or wrong with it. You can, you know, just look for conditions. Okay, so the yo-yo jig, I had a question about that. So, you know, yellowtail, if yellowtail, can yellowtail see the line of 60 or 80-pound leader on your jig? You know, if any fish was smart enough to associate the fact that something was actually leader, they would never bite a jig. Is the way I look at it. I mean, I fished wire. I fished bass on an Alabama rig that's made out of coat hangers, basically, with small swim baits hanging off it. And spotted bay bass, which is supposed to be the smartest of all bass and hardest to catch, they can't stay off the thing. So I really don't think so. It's a reaction strike you're going for, Kurt. And as long as your jig is swimming in a normal way, the fish don't. And a lot of people worry, oh, I have a short leader. Can the fish see where my specter comes to leader? And they associate that. Yeah, fish, their brain is probably that big. It's like a lizard brain. They're just tubes that take in fish and create poop. So I wouldn't give them much credit. Lunacycles, they do play a big part, Michael. The last few years, full and new moons have been the biggest times that fish bite, but that's not always the best thing. I fished Clemente a couple of weeks ago on the full moon, and the yellowtail bite that had been happening on the front side, that full moon brought bigger tides, which brought upwelling of dirty water, which wiped out the yellowtail bite at the island. We caught some small ones in the kelp mixed with bass, but it wasn't the big ones that were biting on the front side were gone. Things change on the full moon. It could be good, it could be bad. Lately, the last few years, it's been mostly good. That day we went out and found a bunch of bluefin right off the island. But going into lunar cycles, things stay consistent right up until 2 or 3 days before. And if it's bad, it could get good. If it's good, it could get bad. But yeah, you know, lately it's been good more than bad. Can you fish the surface iron fast for yellowtail? Kai, yeah, you could, you know, certain jigs fish faster than others. If you want to really burn on the surface, I would go with the Tatty Starman 112. That's one of the jigs that will always stay in the water, or a Salas 7X. A Tatty 45 is more of a finessey surface iron, and you want to wind it in such a way that will make it swim right, as opposed to other jigs that you can retrieve at other speeds. I have another thing about the hooks on the jigs. I only fish treble hooks, whatever comes with the jigs. They usually don't last long enough for me to change anything out. I've got some that are rusty, and I'll put a new treble hook on. Some guys use those assist hooks and stuff like that. Just, I don't know. I've never had a problem with treble hooks, so that's kind of what I use. Fishing a patty, which direction do you approach patties? Yeah, okay, so if I'm fishing a patty for yellows, I will try and approach the patty in a direction where I'll drift down onto it or drift past it. So, and I won't ever drive past it on my way there. If I see a patty off this, I'll make a big half circle. I'll go upwind of it. I'll cast my bait stand towards it and drift down its side. And I'll never actually line up with it. So I'll be a long cast away from the patty as I drift past. And as far as slow trolling goes, I don't think there's really a big difference there, Steve. I hope that answers your question. Favorite jig colors for tuna? Well, that's not a Yellowtail question, but mint and white. That's all we use for anything. I'm telling you guys, buy mint and white jigs. You don't need all the other stuff. It's yeah, it's a waste of money. But don't tell Joey Tatty I said that. Might be a dumb question. You really said for jigs is a paid for it, everything else reference. Yeah, okay. So here's the thing. This is a guy that's Tom. He's a bait fisherman. There's nothing wrong with that. If you can get squid, squid is really a good bait for yellowtail, but it does slow you down because it doesn't really do a lot. You got to cast it out, hope for the best. If you're a guy that likes to anchor up and stuff, I would always get squid if you're going to be fishing that. When I do fish bait for yellows, but it's been a while, I'll snag a tank of mackerel because that's something you can slow troll. That's something that you can butt hook and get it swim down fast. That's something, you know, it's a more versatile bait. Sardines, my live well's like just kills all the sardines I get, so I don't even really like to fish them. And if I do, I take very few and let them die in a tank and then go fish jigs anyway. So that might okay. So I had a question, John Wilson, about how long of a fluorocarbon leader. Whatever I'm fishing, and I think the example he gave me was Benny. You know, use a leader as long as the fish you're targeting. I like a leader that I can cast without it going through the tip. So the longest on a jig stick I'll fish is normally 3 feet. I've recently started on some of my heavier rods, especially when I tune it around, to make a longer leader, and I'll do a hollow braid where I'll do the inserted leader, and I'll do about a 10 or 15 foot one. But I still prefer the short one that stays out of the rod tip. So if you can tie a FG knot or a Tony Pena, and you can, I mean, I've used a leader that's 12 inches before and had no problem doing it if I didn't want to retie. So I have a question from Jim Markham about the Navionics map you can get for your Lowrance unit. Anybody that's fishing in Southern California, I recommend the Navionics West Regions card. It's the less expensive than the Platinum series. Unless you're a freshwater guy, you really don't need that. And that works with basically all the fish finders. And if you're thinking about getting a new fish finder, go to Navionics.com, and you can actually, they have a lot of bundle packages. So if you buy the card and the fish finder at the same time, you save quite a bit of money on it. But I would recommend, obviously it's a Navionics webinar, but I do use it and I do recommend it highly. I already answered Ray. I answered the question about long versus short top shots. I like a short top shot. I use unless I'm using a hollow braid where I'm inserting it, I use an FG knot or a Tony Pena, depending on how confident I am with the FG knot at any given time. I tied a couple of quick ones and had them fail, but they always failed casting. Thank God that I didn't lose any fish on them. But if I don't feel I'm tying it right on the water, I'll go back to the Tony Pena. Braid over mono for surface iron. Edwin, I've been fishing braid for over 15 years now, very long time. Mark Higashi at Performance Tackle turned me onto it. I think it's got to be 15 years. It's a more direct connection. I like the way it casts better. If you're a mono guy and you're comfortable with it, stay with it. You know, it's a big transition. It took me about a year or two to get over to it. But as a private boater, I find it to be much better. And I can kill fish a lot faster. But you also have to have rods. You know, if you got stiff graphite rods with straight braid, you're going to have problems. I use a lot of graphite composites with a glass tip, which makes it softer and easier to use. So, Edwin, you can send me a private message. I'm more than happy to have a longer conversation about that if you want, but I'm running out of time here. That's not time to jig. You know, so hey, Adrian. I try and improve clinch knot on everything. It's a knot I learned as a kid. I know there's a lot of great knots, San Diego Jam knot, Palomar, all this other nonsense. That 6 twist, back through, improved clinch knot, look it up. I've never had one fail. I've even converted people over to it. So it's an easy knot, and you'll love it. I have a question about satellite weather. I don't think you need it on the West Coast. XM or whatever the thing is. I'm thinking about getting satellite radio for my my boat stereo, but I wouldn't use it. You know, just if you have a web app like Windy, you check the National Weather Service report before you go out. We don't have thunderstorms and things like that to where we might this week, but normally that's not a consideration. Okay, here's a good example. How quickly do you decide to move on when you don't find current in an area as small as SBI? About 3 casts into it. I don't spend any time at all. If there's not conditions, wherever you are, if there's no conditions that indicate there's biting fish there, I won't even cast. I mean, it's a waste of time. You're going to get nothing. You'll know. You'll see it. I mean, I've driven to SBI, done a lap around the island, and ran back to Catalina to fish. I mean, that's just, I don't care to fish in dead water, wherever it is, be it the front side of Clemente, be it Catalina, be it SBI, be it the Horseshoe Kelp. If there's no current and no signs of feeding activity, there's no reason to fish it. The gear ratio that I like, I don't know what the gear ratio, I think it's 5 to 1 on that Fathom 25N for surface iron. If you guys have not fished this Fathom reel yet, it's like under $200. It's the best surface iron reel I have ever fished in my life. I am not joking. I have had Trinidad's, I have had all the tricked out mules, all the pen things, the Lee Pros. I mean, every jig reel that's ever been on the market I've fished. And that Fathom 25N, even the Torque 25N, this is the Torque 30, which is all the aluminum stuff. I don't like this as much as the cheaper reel, even though it's twice as much. It's an amazing reel. I caught bluefin to 125 pounds on it. Fishing marlin turns, we've had marlin over. Jimmy caught a blue marlin, probably close to 200 pounds on one. They no brainer on that reel. Yeah, Andy likes the improved clinch knot. Glad you like it, buddy. 6 to 1 ratio apparently on the Fathom. Thank you, Kai, for clarifying that for me. And I'm about out of time, guys, and I really appreciate everybody joining me. I had a good turnout here. Thanks. And if anybody has any questions after the fact, I'm always available via instant messenger on Facebook or Instagram, Bloody Decks, SD Fish, any of the websites you can get me. Shoot me a message. I'm always happy to answer. And thank you all for joining.